It is the summer of 1973. In a lavish villa on the sun-drenched coast of Saint-Tropez, one of the most desired women who ever lived is lying completely still, her body pale, her pulse barely detectable. Again. For the fourth time in her life, Brigitte Bardot, the woman whose face had launched 1,000 magazine covers, the woman whom Pablo Picasso once painted and Simone de Beauvoir wrote essays about, the woman whom an entire generation worshipped like a goddess, was fighting to stay alive. Not from a disease, not from an accident, from despair so complete, so consuming, that even a life of unprecedented fame, beauty, and desire could not cure it. How does that happen? How does the most envied woman in the world end up broken in a bathtub, wondering if anyone will find her in time? That is the question at the heart of today's story. The real story of Brigitte Bardot is not the one you think you know. It is not the story of a carefree sex kitten bounding across sunlit beaches. It is not the poster. It is not the pout. The real story is about a young girl who was turned into a symbol before she ever had a chance to become a person, a story about the machinery of desire, about how an entire industry, an entire culture, and a long procession of powerful men systematically dismantled a human being while celebrating the shell she left behind. It is a story of 4 suicide attempts, broken marriages, a son she described as a cancerous tumor, a body she hated even as the world worshipped it, and, against all odds, a survival that eventually rewrote the very definition of who she was. Today, we're going to tell you the whole story. The rise, the exploitation, the heartbreak, the humiliation, the scandal, and the long, strange road to something that finally resembled peace. Stay with us, because this one is going to shake you. To understand Brigitte Bardot, you have to start not in Hollywood, not on a film set, not in the pages of Playboy. You have to start in Paris, in a beautiful apartment, a short walk from the Eiffel Tower. In a world of crystal glasses, starched linen, and the quiet, suffocating expectations of the French haute bourgeoisie, Brigitte Anne-Marie Bardot was born on September 28, 1934, the first child of Louis Pilou Bardot and Anne-Marie Toti Moussel. Her father was a successful industrialist, wealthy, disciplined, imposing. Her mother was a society woman of great refinement and even greater ambition. Together, they inhabited a world where appearance was everything, where a girl's greatest achievement was to be pretty, poised, and perfectly controlled. And Brigitte, from the very beginning, was all of those things, plus something else. A wildness, a heat, a restlessness behind her dark eyes that no amount of bourgeois etiquette could fully contain. From the moment she could stand upright, Brigitte dreamed of one thing: the ballet. Not fame, not cinema. She wanted the stage, the discipline, the art. At age 7, she began formal training. By 13, she had been accepted into the National Conservatory of Music and Dance in Paris. Her teacher reportedly called her one of the most naturally gifted students she had ever taught. This was not a girl who stumbled into the world of beauty accidentally. This was a girl who worked for it, who trained until she wept from exhaustion because she loved it. But then her photograph appeared. In 1949, when Brigitte was just 15 years old, her mother submitted a photograph to Elle magazine. The editors accepted immediately. Brigitte appeared on the cover that same year, a schoolgirl, barely into adolescence, radiant and achingly young, staring out from newsstands across the country. The response was enormous, and it changed everything. Modeling offers arrived by the handful. Her parents were thrilled. Brigitte herself felt something more complicated, excitement mixed with a growing awareness that she had, in some way she couldn't fully articulate, been claimed. None of that prepared her for what came next. His name was Roger Vadim. Roger Vadim was 22 years old when he first laid eyes on Brigitte Bardot. She was 16. He was a director's assistant, ambitious, magnetic, moving through the world with a predator's confidence and a poet's tongue. Their meeting was ostensibly professional. He had spotted her photos and wanted her to audition for an upcoming film. She came, she auditioned. She did not get the part. But Vadim had not really been interested in casting her. He had been interested in her. He pursued her with an intensity the teenage Brigitte found completely overwhelming, terrifying, and irresistible. "He looked at me," she would later write, "scared me, attracted me. I didn't know where I was anymore." Vadim wanted, in his own explicit words, a woman with spirit, a woman with a sense of adventure and sexual curiosity. He did not see a frightened teenager. He saw raw material, something he could shape. The relationship was kept secret, but when her parents discovered it, the reaction was explosive. Both demanded an immediate and absolute end to everything. Brigitte was told that Roger Vadim was gone from her life, forever. Unable to imagine existence without the man she had surrendered herself to, the 16-year-old Brigitte Bardot walked into the kitchen of her family home, put her head in the gas oven, and turned it on. Her parents found her just in time. This was her first suicide attempt. She was 16 years old. The thing that should stop you cold is not the drama of the act itself. It is what it reveals about who Brigitte already was at 16. The completeness of her surrender, the devastating conviction that a life without this particular man was not a life worth living. A girl like that, in a world that fed on exactly that kind of intensity and exploited it without mercy, was never going to have an easy time. Her parents, shaken and frightened, relented, with one strict condition. Roger Vadim was not to touch their daughter until she turned 18. And the moment she turned 18, they were to marry with full parental blessing. On June 21st, 1952, just months after Brigitte's 18th birthday, they did exactly that. Brigitte in white, radiant, heartbreakingly young. Vadim beside her, smiling. The smile of a man who has gotten precisely what he came for. In the first years of their marriage, Vadim threw himself into making Brigitte famous. He used every connection he had to position her as something the world had never seen. A Frenchwoman who was simultaneously girlish and openly sexual, innocent and unashamedly carnal. Brigitte took small film roles, learning her craft. She was not, by her own admission, a technically brilliant actress. "I am not an actress," she would famously say. "I can only play myself." But what she could do, what she did with effortless natural authority, was inhabit her own physical presence on screen with a completely unself-conscious, magnetic eroticism that left audiences stunned. In 1956, Vadim cast his wife as the lead in his directorial debut, Et Dieu, Créa la femme, and God Created Woman. Shot in Saint-Tropez in blazing color and saturated Mediterranean light, the film featured Brigitte moving through the world with a shameless, joyful physicality that cinema had never permitted a woman before. In 1956, in a world still corseted by post-war conservatism, it was absolutely explosive. The film was banned in several American states, the Catholic Church issued formal condemnations, and audiences went completely, deliriously mad for it. And God Created Woman became one of the highest-grossing foreign films in American box office history up to that point. Overnight, the most famous woman in the world. The darker truth was that Brigitte had not merely been made, she had been used. Her body, her image, her sexuality, all deployed with extraordinary calculation in the service of a career that belonged as much to her husband as to her. She had been the material. He had been the architect. And now that everyone was stopping to gaze at the edifice in wonder, the question was, what happened to the woman inside? The answer came swiftly, and it was not pretty. During the filming of And God Created Woman, Brigitte fell in love with her co-star, Jean-Louis Trintignant, a young French actor of dark, brooding good looks. On set, witnesses recalled that Brigitte and Trintignant would continue kissing long after Vadim called cut. Trintignant was also married. Neither fact slowed anyone down. Vadim later claimed he had known and had not been troubled. "I would always prefer to have that kind of wife, knowing she is unfaithful to me, rather than possess a woman who just loves me and no one else." The marriage was over. Both couples divorced. Brigitte and Trintignant lasted 2 years before that too burned out, consumed, like almost everything in Brigitte's life, by the ferocity of its own heat. And then she moved on. Because Brigitte Bardot did not do heartbreak quietly. She accelerated, reaching for the next thing as if stillness itself was the enemy. "I like to have one in sight before the other goes," she told a friend. "Nobody has any security in loving me." By the late 1950s, she was not merely a film star, she was a cultural force. She appeared on the cover of Playboy in 1958 at 24. The very thing that had made her famous, her unself-conscious, liberated sexuality, was being co-opted and sold in ways that had nothing to do with liberation. Studios wanted her body, magazines wanted her face, and somewhere inside all this wanting, the actual person, the girl who had wanted to be a ballerina, was being buried alive. Her films grew more explicitly erotic with each passing year. The Vatican condemned her by name, and with each condemnation, the box office numbers climbed higher, and Brigitte Bardot became more famous and more alone. She was called insatiable, dangerous, a femme fatale. She was called everything except what she actually was, a deeply unhappy young woman who had never learned she had the right to exist outside of someone else's desire for her. In 1959, Brigitte Bardot married for the second time. Her new husband was the French actor Jacques Charrier, handsome, charming, desperately in love with her. She was 25 years old, an international superstar at the absolute height of her powers. The marriage began in a blaze of romantic optimism. It nearly ended her. Within months of the wedding, Brigitte discovered she was pregnant. What followed was one of the most painful and widely misunderstood chapters of her life. Brigitte did not want to be pregnant. She said so publicly, in terms so raw they horrified a generation of readers who expected famous women to perform maternal joy even when they felt none. "I looked at my flat, slender belly in the mirror," she wrote in her memoir, "like a dear friend upon whom I was about to close a coffin lid." She tried everything to end the pregnancy. She was not secretive or shameful about this. She was desperate and direct. "I'm not made to be a mother," she said. "I'm not adult enough. I know it's horrible to have to admit that, but I'm not adult enough to take care of a child." The pregnancy continued nonetheless. On January 11, 1960, Brigitte's 26th birthday, her son Nicolas Jacques Charrier was born. On that same day, Brigitte attempted to take her own life for the second time. Let that land for a moment. On the day her son was born, on her own birthday, the woman who had everything the world said a woman should want, beauty, fame, wealth, adoration, a new child, tried to die. It tells you everything you need to know about the gap between the life Brigitte Bardot was performing for the world and the life she was actually living inside her own skin. She could not bond with the baby. Motherhood felt to her like a trap, an amputation of self, a demand she had no capacity to meet. Charrier's parents stepped in almost immediately, taking care of the infant, while Brigitte retreated into the world of film sets and hotel rooms and the next escape. By 1962, the marriage was over. Charrier divorced Brigitte and took full custody of Nicolas. The relationship between Brigitte and Nicolas remained strained and largely absent for decades. He did not invite her to his wedding. Later in life, after she published passages in her memoir describing her unborn child as a cancerous tumor, he sued her for emotional damages. A French court ordered her to pay both son and ex-husband a combined settlement of £36,000. It was, by any measure, a tragedy without a clean resolution. By the mid-1960s, Brigitte had survived 2 marriages, 2 suicide attempts, 1 child, and a decade of industrial-scale exploitation. She was 30 years old, impossibly, improbably, more famous than ever. It was at this point that Gunter Sachs entered the picture. Sachs was a German industrialist and playboy, heir to a vast automotive fortune, spectacularly handsome, and gifted with an almost theatrical flair for romantic gesture. When he finally made his move on Brigitte, he rented a helicopter, filled it with 1,000 red roses, and had it fly low over her villa in Saint-Tropez. The roses rained down on her garden from the sky. "I thought he was magnificent," she wrote later. "I was hypnotized." Within 2 months, they were married in Las Vegas. It was the summer of 1966. Brigitte looked, for the first time in years, genuinely happy. The happiness lasted approximately 72 hours. Back in France, within days of returning from their honeymoon, Brigitte had already begun an affair with British actor Mike Sarn, her co-star in a new film. Sachs knew. The entire crew knew. The tabloids camping outside the studio gates knew. Sachs stayed, remarkably. He had pursued a woman whose entire public identity was built on the impossibility of possession. He should not have been surprised, but the pain must have been considerable. The 3-year marriage ended in divorce in 1969. Sachs marked its passing with one of the most bittersweet tributes in the history of broken relationships. A year with Bardot was worth 10 with anyone else. He would take his own life in 2011. When the news reached Brigitte, it hit her hard. Whatever had passed between them, he had been real to her. In 1967, while still married to Sachs, Brigitte crossed paths with the man who would produce the most scandalous single artifact of her entire career. Serge Gainsbourg, famously unconventional in appearance, perpetually disheveled, armed with a supernatural gift for transgression and an intelligence that cut through pretension like a knife through smoke, had been commissioned to write songs for her. He wrote 2. And then, in the recording studio, as the tape rolled and the musicians played, something happened between Brigitte and Gainsbourg that resulted in sounds being captured on that tape that were absolutely unmistakable in their nature. The song was called Je t'aime, moi non plus. I love you, me neither. The version recorded with Brigitte contained, woven into its breathy orchestral textures, what were clearly sounds of genuine sexual pleasure, real, unperformed, wholly authentic. Brigitte immediately panicked. She was still married to Sachs. The potential scandal was enormous. She demanded the recording be suppressed. The tape was shelved. Gainsbourg, characteristically, did not let the song die. He re-recorded it with his then-girlfriend Jane Birkin, another fearlessly uninhibited performer who had none of Brigitte's second thoughts about the finished product. That version was released in 1969. It went to #1 on the UK charts. It was banned by the BBC, condemned by the Vatican, and became one of the most controversial and iconic recordings of the 20th century. Brigitte, watching from the sidelines, reportedly said nothing publicly. She had been, once again, the original. Once again, someone else had benefited from her willingness to transgress. Once again, the world got the sensation while she was left with the consequences. By the early 1970s, something in Brigitte Bardot was visibly breaking. She was in her late 30s. The film industry, which had consumed her so completely for 2 decades, was beginning to move on. New actresses were arriving with new faces and new willingness to give the camera what it wanted. The era of Bardot, of that particular sun-drenched, freewheeling Mediterranean sexuality, was passing. And somewhere inside the relentless public spectacle of her life, the private person had been ground down to almost nothing. She was simultaneously a symbol of female liberation and a monument to female objectification. Depending on who you asked, she was a pioneer or a victim. She felt, she would later say, like neither. She felt mostly exhausted. Her 3rd suicide attempt came in the early 1970s. Her 4th, the one from the opening of our story, came in the summer of 1973. She was 39 years old, found in her Saint-Tropez villa, her wrists cut by a friend who had grown alarmed at her silence. She survived. Again. After this 4th attempt, something shifted. Not a sudden enlightenment, a gradual, grinding, hard-won reorientation. For the first time in her life, Brigitte Bardot began to ask herself what she actually wanted. Not what the camera wanted, not what a lover wanted, not what the industry demanded. What she, the private person behind the public symbol, actually wanted from whatever time she had left. The answer surprised everyone who thought they knew her. It started with a single act of compassion that grew, almost despite itself, into a defining life's mission. Brigitte had always loved animals. Throughout her wildest years, through the affairs and the films and the tabloid bedlam, she had kept dogs, cats, and horses with a tender consistency her human relationships never matched. Animals asked nothing of her that she couldn't give. They did not want her body. They did not read the gossip columns or measure her worth in box office receipts. They were simply, unconditionally, present. As early as 1962, she had publicly campaigned against the Canadian seal hunt, going to the ice fields herself, kneeling beside harp seals being slaughtered for their pelts, generating photographs that circled the globe and galvanized a generation of animal rights activists. The cynics rolled their eyes at the time. They called it a publicity stunt. But Brigitte had been completely, passionately, unperformatively serious. In 1973, the same year as her final suicide attempt, that pivotal and shattering year, she announced her retirement from cinema. She was 39 years old. She had made approximately 47 films. She had been one of the most photographed humans on the planet for 25 years. And she was done. "I gave my beauty and my youth to men," she said, in what became one of the most quoted statements of her entire life. "I am now giving my wisdom and my experience, the best of myself, to animals." It was not a press release. It was a declaration of independence. In 1974, she appeared nude one final time on the cover of Playboy, a conscious farewell, an image that felt less like surrender and more like a last wave from a departing ship. And then she stepped back from the spotlight entirely. In 1986, she founded the Brigitte Bardot Foundation for the Welfare of Animals, a non-profit organization dedicated to the protection of wild and domestic animals globally. She threw herself into it with the same consuming intensity she had once reserved for love affairs and film roles. She campaigned against the fur trade, against factory farming, against the killing of stray animals, against bullfighting, against shark finning. She lobbied governments. She wrote open letters. She gave the remainder of her public celebrity entirely to the service of causes that could not speak for themselves. The tabloids, frustrated by the absence of love affairs to cover, occasionally dismissed the work as a vanity project. But the work continued, and it accumulated, and it mattered. Legislation was influenced, practices were changed. Her foundation became a genuinely significant force in European animal welfare advocacy. It was not the legacy anyone had predicted for the woman in the bikini. It was something considerably more durable. In 1992, at the age of 57, Brigitte Bardot fell in love one more time. His name was Bernard Dormal, a French businessman and political advisor. Not famous, not glamorous, not the kind of man who filled gardens with roses from helicopters, but something the others had never been: steady. They met in January, they married in August, 1 month after meeting. Given Brigitte's track record, 3 failed marriages, catastrophic affairs, spectacular recurring combustion, the rational prediction was obvious. This would be the worst yet. This would be the marriage that finally destroyed whatever remained of her capacity for connection. Instead, it became the one that saved her. Bernard proved to be exactly what Brigitte had needed all her life and never found. A man who loved her without wanting to possess her, without needing her to be a symbol or a sensation. A man who looked at the tired, complicated, brilliant, deeply scarred Brigitte and chose her again and again, not despite who she was, but because of it. He helped her repair, gradually and carefully, the devastated relationship with her son Nicolas. He provided stability in the Saint-Tropez villa that had seen so much chaos. They have been married for over 30 years. It is, by every available account, a love story. No honest account of Brigitte Bardot can end without addressing the part of her story that is genuinely, uncomfortably troubling, the part that cannot be explained away or reframed as triumph. Beginning in the 1990s, Brigitte made public statements about immigration, Islam, and French national identity that provoked widespread condemnation and resulted in multiple criminal convictions. She was found guilty by French courts on 5 separate occasions between 1997 and 2008 of inciting racial and religious hatred, charges related to statements in her books and interviews described as racist and Islamophobic. She paid the fines. She did not recant. The animal rights community found itself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. The woman who had fought so passionately for voiceless beings appeared to have no equivalent compassion for human beings she perceived as foreign or other. The contradiction was glaring and painful. How do you hold all of this together? The courage and the cruelty, the genuine compassion and the documented prejudice? There is no clean reconciliation. Brigitte Bardot is, in this as in everything, a person of absolute unresolved complexity, a human being of extraordinary gifts and profound failures, shaped by forces that do not excuse her choices but do help explain them. You can admire her courage and condemn her prejudice at the same time. You should. Today, Brigitte Bardot is 90 years old. She lives quietly in La Madrague, her villa in Saint-Tropez, with her husband Bernard, her animals, and the long shadows of an extraordinary life. She rarely speaks publicly. She does not attend film premieres or retrospectives. She does not walk red carpets. The woman who was, for 2 decades, one of the most photographed humans on Earth has maintained for the last 50 years near total invisibility. The Foundation continues its work. Her films, those sun-drenched, transgressive, incandescent films, continue to be watched and argued over. And God-created woman is still shocking in the right kind of way. Her performance in Contempt, Jean-Luc Godard's luminous 1963 masterpiece in which she played opposite Jack Palance and Michel Piccoli, is still considered by many cinephiles among the finest performances ever committed to celluloid. The icon endures. The story endures. But the woman, the actual, private, complicated, surviving woman, has claimed at last something like peace. She once wrote that the hardest thing she ever did was not the films, not the marriages, not the tabloid storms, not the 4 attempts on her own life. The hardest thing was learning to believe that she deserved to exist for her own sake, not for the camera, not for the lover, not for the industry, for herself. It took her 60 years to learn it, but she got there. And that, more than the films, more than the fame, more than the scandals, is the most remarkable thing about Brigitte Bardot. She survived, she endured, she became, against every odd, something that no industry and no lover ever managed to manufacture for her. She became herself. If you found this story as extraordinary as we did, if you stayed with us all the way to the end, please hit subscribe and leave us a comment below. Tell us what surprised you most. Tell us which part of her story hit hardest. And if you want more untold stories about the women the world desired and the lives they actually lived, click the video showing on your screen right now. We'll see you on the next one.